The Florida Gators lost defensive backs coach Will Harris to the Miami Hurricanes, but have already replaced him.
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Locked On Gators, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free, whether it's in the podcast and on YouTube. Today's episode of Locked On Gators is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins with FanDuel. I would like to say that this is the first time in, I want to say, like a year and a half, maybe 2 years, where I was like, hey, you know what? I'm going to take a weekend off. Valentine's Day, I take a weekend off. And Will Harris leaves. Then Will Harris leaves Florida my first day in Toronto. And then as I'm the one driving home on an 11-hour drive, Billy Napier hires Deron Wilson. So I'm recording this when I got home at 2 a.m. Eastern time. And so there's that. But Will Harris has left the Florida Gators to join the Miami Hurricanes. And I think that there's two surprising things about that. One, that he went to the Miami Hurricanes. If you look at last Monday's episode, I was talking about the Texas Longhorns as a possibility. And if you look at, I think it was on Monday as well, when the Saints officially hired Kellen Moore, I tweeted about, hey, maybe the Saints look at him if they hire Brandon Staley as the defensive coordinator, because Will Harris coached under Brandon Staley. And then I go to Toronto and Will Harris leaves for Miami. That was a surprising thing. For him to go to Miami was not expected. Especially hate that. The other surprising thing about it, safeties coach. Not even the full secondary. Safeties coach. He left to go be the safeties coach. And I think that is surprising, but also noteworthy, because it's not surprising that Will Harris left the Florida Gators, right? If you've been part of the Insider program, which if you want to join, the link's in the description below. But if you're part of the Insider program, then you've known since the fall. And even if you've been watching the show since the fall, you know that's around, we'll say week 4-ish is around the time that we started talking about rumors that Will Harris had some tension with Ron Roberts, and some other coaches had some tension with Ron Roberts as well. And it's not the first time that's been reported about Roberts. It's not the first time, or it's not the first school that's been reported at with Ron Roberts, that he's been difficult to work with, that he rubs people the wrong way. And then, like I said in the fall, this is something at Auburn and Baylor. Now it's at Florida. But look, I'm also not going to be the type of person to act like losing Will Harris means the sky is falling. Okay. I think he's a great coach. I'm not going to change that, which, by the way, can we talk about that for a second? Because Will Harris, we'll talk about last week, right? Last week when there were Will Harris rumors about him leaving, the timeline for Florida Gators fans was, oh my God, Billy can't let Will Harris leave. Billy, do whatever it takes to keep Will Harris. Billy, you can't let Will Harris leave. Will Harris is a must keep. And then he goes to Miami, and all of a sudden it's, well, the PFF grades say this. I don't know what that's about. But he's a good coach. Okay. We're not going to diminish the value. Just like, look, I hate that he went to Miami, and now I hate him. I have to. It's them's be the rules. But I will also say that doesn't make him any worse of a coach. Like, he's still a good coach. I'm not going to take that away from him. I don't care what PFF grades say. It's always been a thing, especially in the secondary. Whew. No, thank you. No, thank you. And even if for the people that do want to bring up grades, the fact that the secondary and defense got gelled all together, that's a good coaching thing. Okay, getting the team to play in unison, that matters. So we'll say that. And that's about all I'll say on the PFF grade thing that people kept bringing up for no good reason. We're not diminishing the value there at all. The wording of Will Harris's statement, and this is me speculating. I'm not gonna lie, and we speculate here. We have fun with things like that. But the wording of Will Harris's statement was something that I found very interesting. Okay, because I'm not going to read his whole statement, but he tweeted a whole statement on, I think it was Friday. So he tweeted the whole statement. And there's one section that I'm going to read because I do think that it made me at least think a bit, right? I understand business is business, and you have to do what you believe is best for the University of Florida's football program. I appreciate you. That's what he said to Billy Napier. That was directed at Billy Napier during his statement. And I feel like I feel like I understand business is business. You have to do what you believe is best for Florida. I feel like that because I know that a lot of people went, oh, it looks like he got pushed out. I don't think that's true based on the fact that he had a contract extension on the table just a few weeks ago. So I don't think he was pushed out. The wording of that and the knowledge of knowing that he had a contract extension on the table. So the wording of that statement to me makes me feel as though whether he directly or indirectly gave Billy Napier an ultimatum, that's what happened. Again, this is me speculating because we speculate here, but it feels like that wording with just all the context that we know of, that wording, which again, I understand business is business and you have to do what you believe is best for the University of Florida's football program. That, plus knowing that there's tension between himself and Ron Roberts, plus knowing that he had a contract extension on the table for a few weeks ago, or just a few weeks ago, he had a contract extension on the table. To me, that reads more like he essentially approached this as, hey, Billy, it's either Ron Roberts goes or I go. And when Napier chose Roberts, Will Harris went, okay, then I go. That's how I view this, right? Based on people I've spoken to, based on things I know. That's how I think this one shakes out, or how it shook out, at least, was that Will Harris essentially went, hey, I'm not going to be here if Ron Roberts is going to be here, so you make your decision of who stays, and it was Ron Roberts. Again, I'm not going to play into the bull crap that he was pushed out for any reason. Let's not do that. Let's not be 13-year-olds where of like, oh, you didn't like me, I didn't want you anyway, that kind of thing. Let's not do that. There was a contract extension on the table just a few weeks ago for Will Harris. He instead chose to leave, go to Miami because he didn't want to be here for whatever reason he may say, but we're going with our speculative reason of it was him or Roberts, and Napier made his decision. And that's how we're going to look at it, right? But Florida already replaced him with Deron Wilson, and we will talk about that next on Locked On Gators. When the game tips off, the NBA action's just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the action or opening tip-off, or you miss the first 6 minutes of the first quarter, whatever it may be, or if you want a live bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can do all that and so much more. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. It's beautiful right now. New FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to earn today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day every day. We are available daily and free, reviews in the podcast and on YouTube. And like I said, the Florida Gators have already made a hire in Deron Wilson. And it was, I want to say, the second quickest hire in Billy Napier's tenure at Florida. I think the only one that was quicker than that was Austin Armstrong. If I'm not mistaken, that happened all over the course of like a few hours. And so Will Harris left to Miami. We're pretty much done talking about that, right? Except for today. Deron Wilson got hired, which we will probably talk more about Deron Wilson tomorrow. And probably basketball and maybe baseball's back too. And whew, it's going to be good. But Deron Wilson, I will say this, amongst the folks that I've spoken to, which has not been many, because again, I got home at like 1:45 in the morning. So there was like 2 people that responded. We'll hopefully have more answers for tomorrow's show or more responses for tomorrow's show. But Deron Wilson has a good reputation amongst those folks that I've talked to, but similar to Vinny Sunseri, who the hell knows, right? Because Deron Wilson, 8 years of coaching experience, few as a GA, 2 as a DC at McNeese State, 1 as an analyst at Florida, 2 as a defensive backs coach with Arkansas. So he's got experience, at least, more than Vinny Sunseri, who had 5 years of coaching experience prior to getting hired at Florida. But we still don't know 2 major things about, well, really a few major things about both of them, right? We don't know what their recruitment looks like long term, because it's not just like, oh, he had a good year or 2 recruiting. Does that mean you're a good recruiter? Or does it mean you had a good year or 2? Right? Just a good year or 2. That's it. How is he as a long-term developer? We have no idea. Is he going to be good as an SEC coach, which is the thing for Vinny Sunseri and Deron Wilson that we don't know about at a high level? Because Deron Wilson, again, 2 years, which we'll also say this. I don't give a damn about the stats from Arkansas. I really don't. Or the grades. I don't care. 1 really good year, 1 really bad year. 1 year they had a good pass rush, 1 year not so much. 1 year they had all their starters and backups and their secondary was healthy. Another year they were so down bad they had Miguel Mitchell starting. Like you could just throw it out, right? They average out to be an average defense. Okay, can we just call it that? Cool. So we don't know what they look like long term or with high level football players, because that is something that neither of these coaches have had at their previous spots. High level SEC DBs that they're working with. Because yeah, Vinny Sunseri has NFL experience, so I guess he's worked with high-level players, but he was working with running backs. So yeah. I will also say, similar to Vinny Sunseri, this is the second time this offseason that Billy Napier has found a group of 5 school that hired a defensive coordinator, and before they even coach a single game, Billy Napier has hired them to be a secondary coach for the Florida Gators. That's it. Deron Wilson also has Florida ties, which I do feel like is huge because he was an analyst in 2022 here, which means he was an analyst with Billy Napier. Also, I'm curious. I don't think this happens, but I will be curious to see if it happens. If CJ Wilford comes over from Georgia State. CJ Wilford was with Florida, left for Georgia State when Deron Wilson took over as defensive coordinator, and CJ Wilford was supposed to be the safeties coach at Georgia State. And then now Deron Wilson came to Florida. If I had to make a guess, I would say CJ Wilford's not coming here. I would say they probably hire a new DC, don't have too much roster turnover right away. And so CJ Wilford would be in line to potentially have a safety coach job with Georgia State, which would be great for him. And like I mentioned, Deron Wilson has defensive coordinator experience at McNeese State. And look, like I know it was great. So I got home, I opened Twitter, X, whatever the hell you want to call it, and I just saw so many people talking about Deron Wilson. And there were generally three thoughts, and I think that there are only really three thoughts you could have. It was either people saying that they loved the hire. Again, he's got a good reputation, right? Regardless of how you feel about him, he's got a pretty good reputation, at least amongst people I've spoken to. And they generally run with the consensus of how people feel about coaches, or they're generally pretty in line with how people feel about coaches. A lot of respected coaches are. And so you got that. He's got the good reputation. He's got experience at Florida. He's got SEC experience. Why not, right? So sure, good hire. Then there's people that think it's a bad hire. You know, he's not the big name. A lot of us talked about Doug Belk was a name that everybody was looking at. And instead, it's Deron Wilson, who many people may not have even known. And so they think it's a bad hire, especially when you go with the whole thing that we've seen. Just Florida Gators fans obsess over lately. Just obsess over of, well, he's not the big name. He's not the big name. Look, it doesn't freaking matter if he's the big name or not. Okay, let's just be honest. Big name doesn't matter. We've seen big name hires suck at the University of Florida. Think about it. 2022 and 2023. Who was our DB coach? Yep. Big name sucked here, so I don't care about it. Deron Wilson, not a big name. Great. Cool. Works for me. But what he is, and this is the third thought, he's an unknown. Like I said, that's where I land on it. That's where I stand on Vinny Sinceri as well. I can say that, the resume doesn't say he should be a co-DC, or the resume doesn't say he should be this. But when it comes down to it, not everything is about your resume, right? Sometimes it's about who you know. And in the case of Deron Wilson and Billy Napier, they know each other. That's it. That's a pretty quick tie. How often do we talk about, this coaching vacancy opened up? Here's how this person's tied to Billy Napier, or whoever the coordinator is on that side of the ball. A lot of times it's just who you know. So Deron Wilson coming to the Florida Gators, and look, I'll be honest about this. Him having 2 years of defensive coordinator experience, even if it was at McNeese State, that's good. Okay. Like that's helpful to get that kind of defensive mind in the room with you. It's just someone that can help you be a coordinator for whoever. There's like 17 defensive coordinators. So whoever it is can help you. That matters, okay? And I will say this as well. You can go back to the shows here, and with Will Harris, the way that I looked at it was, well, he's either seen Jimmy Lake develop or he did the developing. Either way, he saw success there. Let it ride. I'm going to take the same approach with Deron Wilson, okay? We haven't seen much of him as an on-field coach. I'm going to let it ride and just see how it shakes out. Okay? Great. The Florida Gators lost a commit as well. It was a busy weekend. Florida Gators lost a commit. We'll talk about that on Locked On Gators. To wrap up today's episode of Locked On Gators, we are indeed talking about a decommitment. So here's the thing. I'll be honest with you. When Will Harris left Florida, I didn't do any prep work for the show because he left on Thursday. It is now Monday. I didn't do any prep for the show there. But what I did do was mentally, I was like, okay, first segment, I'm going to talk about Will Harris. Second segment, I'm going to talk about which players might leave. And third is probably possible replacements. And then they hired Deron Wilson before I could do the fun stuff of the possible replacements where I can nerd out for coaching candidates. It was fun. It would have been a doozy. I'm just saying. We had Doug Belk, Derek Ansley. It would have been a good time. Deron Wilson was on the list, but he wasn't the top two, so he wasn't going to be in the first one. But when I said who might leave, there's two categories, right? There's players that are current for Florida Gators, currently on the roster that might leave, and there's players that were committed to Florida. One of those players that was committed to Florida was 2026 cornerback Jalen Waters. He was kind of considered like a 50-50 between Florida and Miami for a while. We spoke about it, I don't know, like a month or so ago, that, well, he's a Florida commit, but he's visiting Miami multiple times. And yeah, this was, I want to say early January. And I said, hey, I don't think he's going to flip to Miami this weekend, but it wouldn't shock me if at some point he does it. And then again, this was 40 days ago. So he didn't commit to Miami. He didn't flip to Miami that time, but he did announce his decommitment from the University of Florida after Will Harris announced his departure. And I don't have any inside scoop on that, but I have to imagine that losing the position coach definitely didn't help keep him. Like, let's say he was kind of 1 foot out the door, right? Losing the position coach that's been recruiting him probably didn't help Florida there, right? So you lost him. I'm not going to do the thing where a kid decommits and we all of a sudden act like he's not good. Same thing with Will Harris. I think Jalen Waters is a hell of a DB. A lot of potential with him. Just not, that's it. But moving on to kids that are Florida Gators, I do think that there are some DBs who were at Florida in 2024 that could consider going to Miami, and even some of the new enrollees in 2025, right? Because all the 2024 kids, whether you played much or didn't, you were still being coached by Will Harris. So you quite possibly could have been developing that relationship with him, right? So 2024 kids were coached by Will Harris. They know what he's like. They know if that style works for them or if they like that style. Then they can go there if they'd like. Then there's also the new enrollees for 2025 who Will Harris was their primary recruiter and Will Harris was their position coach whenever they signed. So there's those as well. And look, I'm not saying that there's anybody that I look at right now and I go, oh yeah, they're gone. I just think there's too much open competition right now in the secondary. Because it's not like there's anybody that we definitively know is going to be riding the pine this year, right? For us, at least for the Florida Gators, a lot of the secondary spots, like we know who's competing for those spots. We know that they rotate those spots. So it's like, even if you win the battle, you're going to come off the field. But it's still having that starter role, right? That starter title. And that's not an issue right now. That's it. Like, there's not anybody that has that starter title, starter role that you can look at who's behind them and say, oh, they're definitely leaving. Especially as far as young players, like there's no freshman or sophomore that you can look at and you go, oh, they're starting in 2025 in the secondary without a doubt. And I mean true freshman or true sophomore, no redshirt. There's none that you go, hey, they're starting at this spot. In the secondary, none. So I don't think that there's anybody that would have the incentive to leave right away, because I do feel like a lot of times when kids leave, it's, I'm buried on the depth chart, I'm going to head out. It's not so much an issue this time, right? So maybe that helps Florida, right? Maybe. But again, I will always say we like to connect dots here, and position coach leaves, maybe player hits the portal to go follow them. That's a dot to connect there. I will also say that I do think that because two things. One, because Will Harris is going to be their safeties coach at Miami, and two, because Deron Wilson has already been hired as the defensive backs coach, which we can assume he's going to focus on corners, because that's what he worked with when he was an analyst. He was an analyst with the corners. Because of those two things, Will Harris is coaching safeties and Deron Wilson already being your corners coach essentially now. I don't want to say definitively, but I kind of want to rule out corners transferring since the hire's already made at corner and Will Harris isn't going to be the guy coaching you there. Kind of feel like you can rule that one out. At least I think I can, right? I will until I'm proven wrong. That's how I'm doing it. Also important to note that this isn't like Deshaun Purdy interested in Georgia. There is no need to wait a year if they enter the spring portal. They can enter the spring portal and then go right to Miami without needing to wait. Just something to note where it's not like, oh, yeah, you got to sit out a year anyway. Not a thing. Thanks for making Locked On Gators your first listen of the day. Every day we are available daily and free wherever listen to podcast and on YouTube. We'll be back. Well, I'm like I said, I'm recording this 2:19 a.m. right now. So we'll be back tomorrow still, I guess. Yeah, we'll be back tomorrow. Talk more Florida Gators football. For Locked On Gators, I'm Brandon Olson. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at WNS_Brandon. Find all my written work for New York Giants on SI, and I'll see you all next time.